in which case I can't say good evening if it's different time zones, but good day and welcome. I'm John Taylor. I'm the Chief Examiner with Pearson for Project Qualifications and the Principal Moderator for the Dissertation Unit. And with me today as our co-host is Rachel Steele. Do you want to say hello, Rachel?
I will say hello, welcome everybody, lovely to see you, and I will be giving some insight into the creative units as I am the principal for P304 Artifacts. I'll also keep an eye on the chat as we go through, so hopefully I can field some questions as we go, and if there's anything I can't answer I think is worthy of being shared with the group, we've got some spaces within our time to come back in a group to them.
Super. Great. Well, our aims for this today principally are to have a good think about the assessment of EPQs, how they're marked, and a good look at some exemplar work to help fix our sense of the standard that's expected. We're also going to spend a little bit of time in the next few minutes with a general background, because I'm conscious that EPQ may be a new qualification for some of you. So let me say a few words by way of introduction about that, and then that take us the first 10-15 minutes. At that point, we'll pause for any initial questions. So do please start right away with questions going into the chat thread. And we'll have a pause in 15 minutes or so to talk through any questions that have come in. Then we'll do a deep dive into the marking grids to give you a real sense of what 301, 302, 303, and 304 look like. We're aiming for a break, so you get a chance to put the kettle on if you need to, or just have a breather around about halfway through the session for a few minutes. That will also give you a chance to complete downloading the materials if you've not yet managed to access them. And then for the second part of the session, our main focus will be a walkthrough of the exemplars that we have available today, and then some final comments plus responses to any final questions that you've put in. So please keep the questions coming in as they occur to you, and we'll try and mop them up at various points in the session. Okay, let me just adjust my screen, and then I'm going to hit play on my screen share, and I'm hoping it'll turn magically into a slide presentation. Is that how's that looking? Are we there with getting ready to mark?
Yes,
on screen.
Mark is on screen.
Lovely. Okay, so as I've said, aims for today, we're thinking a little bit about the basic structure of EPQ, how it's assessed, and then we'll think through looking at the standards and trying to understand the marking grids as they apply by reference to some exemplar work, and then a final chat about any common issues or links to the further support that's available. So as I'm sure you're aware, EPQ is a level 3 qualification, broadly comparable to A-level in standard, and it occupies 120 guided learning hours. Of that 120 guided learning hours, which is a term of art, it's a reference point for you to give you an idea of the volume of work that's associated with the qualification. We don't mandate an exact number of teaching hours that are used for this. That's a choice for you in your centre, but it gives you an idea of the volume of work that's associated with the qualification. And we think it's important to provide teaching support. We recommend, although again we don't mandate, but we recommend around about 40 hours that are spent providing guidance to learners, and then around about 80 hours or so for the actual project. So that's a very substantial chunk of time, and I think that's an important point with the project qualification, that it's probably going to be the single biggest piece of work that learners have done in the course of their school career. And as such, we need to manage the time that's allocated to it carefully and thoughtfully, and encourage them to be reflective about how they manage their time. So there's lots about that if you browse some of our schemes of work that are available on the Pearson website, how we can segment those 80 guided learning hours into sections, for example, with different activities such as a research section or a development section or a review section. It's a 4 units qualification, if you're not familiar with it. Dissertation, investigation, performance, and artifact. You only enter for one of those units, and each unit has its own assessment criteria, its own marking grid, and we have within Pearson teams of moderators who look particularly at specific units. So obviously it matters that we understand the unit structure and that our learners understand what unit they're entering for. One change that's quite recent is that we've broken the specification out into the different units. So if you search up the Pearson EPQ specification and scroll through a few pages, you'll get hyperlinks to a miniature specification for the dissertation unit, one for the investigation, one for performance, and one for artifact. And I think that's going to be very helpful to you and to learners in understanding the requirements of each. I think it's important as well that we understand that the project qualification is designed to enable and assess the development of skills in independent learning. It's all about handing over responsibility for learning to the learner. So that we expect to see in most projects that they take responsibility for the management of their project. They may, of course, need support and guidance, especially at the outset as they get started and they're framing their questions or their challenges for their practical projects. And there has to be a negotiation with a mentor and a conversation about what's appropriate and plenty of support that can be provided. But as the project unfolds, it should become increasingly their project. And you'll see when we look at the assessment objectives that there is credit given in the higher end of the range in AO1, in project management assessment objective, for learners who can really control and own that project process for themselves. But we don't expect, this is not a kind of take it away and leave it and do it on your own and we'll see you in 6 months' time qualification. Learning here is involving support from a teacher assessor who can be questioning, challenging, prompting, goading all the way through the process. And as I'm sure if you're familiar with the qualification, you will know that what a wonderful journey that can be for many learners. And it's always a pleasant experience at the end of the course as they give their presentations, just to discover how much they've managed to learn for themselves and see the power of this self-directed process. I won't say much about this because it's a topic probably for another event, but I have already mentioned that the project qualification occupies a very substantial amount of time. This is not something you can do, I wouldn't imagine, in a busy weekend. So there needs to be an impetus, there needs to be a motivation that will be keeping the learner going. It's not something that you can really do if your heart isn't in it. So one of the points that we emphasize in the guidance is that learners should look to pick a title that relates to their own interests, their aspirations, their plans for future work or study. It may be, for example, that they've encountered a topic in a course that they're studying and they want to take it much further than the syllabus allows. So the key point here is that we want them to be driving the process, and therefore there needs to be something in it for them. It's got to be their choice. This is not something like perhaps a standard coursework exercise where a title is prescribed and, like it or not, the learner has to do it. They get to choose, and it's valuable to encourage them to be bold in choosing something that they will find intrinsically interesting and motivational, because of course when that happens they're far more likely to do a really successful project. I won't say much about this, but it's worth a moment to reflect on that the EPQ, having been running now for 15 or so years in the UK, and now also, of course, substantially in the international space as well, the EPQ has attracted a very warm reception from higher education institutions, and I think also from employers. Why? Well, because of what I was saying on the previous slide. This is a qualification that really does encourage independent learning. And we do know that the learners who go through this and succeed, they build up a set of skills which are precisely the sorts of skills that we often hear from higher education they want to see in the products of our school system. The ability to manage a question, the ability to persevere over time, the ability to be creative and to think critically and evaluatively rather than just absorb information. And so with this in mind, we know now that if you look at the admissions statements and the admissions information on university websites, it's quite common now for universities to mention the EPQ in very complimentary terms. And a number, not a majority, but a substantial number now are recognizing the EPQ in the grade offers that they make. So that they may, for example, discount a grade on their standard UCAS offer if a learner has a good EPQ. And that obviously is a recognition of the value of EPQ to learners as a preparation for the kind of skills that they will need to use at higher education. Okay, enough then of the general points about the qualification. I hope that's given you a flavour of what we're about. Let's start to look in a bit more detail at the kind of stuff that needs to be produced for the assessment process. So all learners should complete a project proposal form. All learners should complete an activity log. All learners should do a presentation at the end of their project, and all learners will produce an outcome. The outcome in the case of a dissertation or an investigation will be a written report. If the project is a performance project, it could contain a written report, or it could be produced, and this is true of artifact projects as well, it could be produced in another form. I'll leave Rachel perhaps to say a little bit about that when we're thinking about the assessment evidence objectives and what they might look like in terms of learner work. But suffice to say that it doesn't have to be simply a written report. If it's a sketchbook, or if it's a slideshow with analysis of information and then the creation of the learner's own ideas being documented, then that may well be a more appropriate format. And in fact, we'll see in one of the exemplars that we're going to look at why that it worked very well, because it's a very visual project. It worked very well in the slideshow format and wouldn't have worked so well as a written report. There are forms available, as you probably know, to download from the project website. So please do access those, because they are expected as the format that we want to see with the assessment evidence when it's sent in. So I've said that we have the 4 units, the dissertation, the investigation, the performance, and the artifact. They are, as I say, assessed slightly differently, although there is a basic commonality across the units. If you're writing, if a learner is writing a dissertation, then we would expect that to be essentially a conventional academic report, probably having things like an abstract, an introduction, literature review, discussion and conclusion, and then an evaluation of the process. That's not the only model. They can write dissertations using a chapters approach, but it should be a recognizable academic report format. The dissertation unit is driven by use of secondary literature. We don't expect in a dissertation that there will be much primary research, possibly interviews, but probably not much beyond that. Often learners try to throw in a questionnaire because it's perhaps a nice thing to do, but it's very difficult to get much valid information from a survey, especially if the sample size is quite limited. So our advice, and we say this frequently on examiner reports, our advice in P301 is to steer clear of questionnaire surveys unless they're conducted very, very rigorously. But if they're constructed rigorously, they would probably fall into the second unit, P302, which is the investigation unit. The key thing about the investigation unit is that it's driven by data. We would expect there to be a hypothesis that can be tested. We would expect collection of primary and secondary data, and we would expect to see extensive analysis of data. So think about the dissertation being driven by secondary literature and argument and counter-argument based on that. Think about the investigation being driven by data with a substantial activity of data collection and data analysis. Performance and artifact are creative units. They involve a slightly different approach. And it's important to emphasize that there is a difference here. We would typically start a dissertation or an investigation with a question or possibly a hypothesis in the case of the investigation unit. But performance and artifact start really with a challenge, a practical task or brief that's been set, or that the learner imagines themselves being set. There doesn't need to be a real client, but often it helps to imagine that there is. And the project performance or the artifact then is in the form of their response to that particular practical challenge. So in the case of performance, the focus will be on meeting the expectations of an audience. There needs to be reference to the audience as part of the framing of the title. And in the case of artifacts, as I've said, it's a creative response to a real or hypothetical client-focused brief. Rachel will be able to explain that in more detail when we get to the assessment objectives in just a moment. Okay, I think at that point, I'm going to, well, yes, let me just say a couple more points about administration, and then we'll pause for some questions. I think there's some stuff happening in the chat thread, but do please fire questions in, and we'll come to those in a moment. So the assessment objectives are fourfold. We have project management, 9 marks out of the 54, 17% of the marks. Use of resources, 12 marks out of 54. So what's that, 22%, I think. Then development and realization, 44% of the marks, 24 out of 54. And AO4 review, marked out of 9, another 17%. So you can see there that all of them are significant, but obviously AO2 and 3 carry the weight of the assessment in terms of the marks available. So we'll see in more detail what that looks like when we go through the individual units. When you're marking, we would expect you to comment and to link your comments to the evidence that's available to you from the learner work, and also to the language of assessment that's used in the assessment objective marking grids. So minimally, it would be good to have detailed commentary on the candidate record sheet. Some learners, some teachers do also annotate scripts, and that can be helpful as a way of showing particular sections and where they're significant when it comes to marking decisions. But we're aware that time can be spent doing annotation, and particularly now that all submission has to be electronic, it can be very time consuming to be annotating lots and lots of projects. So annotation within the project is helpful if it is necessary to indicate why marks were given in particular sections. But if you've already recorded that clearly in your comments on the candidate mark record sheet, please don't feel the need to put copious annotation into the work. We're aware of the administrative challenge of that. There was also, for the observation record, we expect an observation record at the end, and we'd expect that to be marked using the standard form, the oral presentation mark record sheet, to indicate why marks were given for the oral component. There may also be a witness statement that will be particularly appropriate for performance projects, but it may also be appropriate if another outside source has observed part of the project. For example, if there's a vocational or professional involvement of someone who's supporting the learner in that sort of a context. Okay, I think that's fairly self-explanatory. So when we get to marking, let me just complete this section with a couple of comments about that. All projects obviously are marked internally by a teacher assessor, and then there needs to be a process of internal standardization. We, the awarding organization, doesn't mandate how that happens, but we do mandate that it happens. So whether it's through cross-moderation or through appointing somebody who will sample from the cohort, there needs to be some process that's followed to ensure that a common standard is applied to the whole cohort. And then you'll be asked to submit a sample of projects, typically 10. And one thing we do request, because it's an issue every year, is that if the sample that's requested automatically does not include the top and bottom mark project, that you would please insert that as well. So that in fact, you will be submitting potentially 10, 11 or 12 projects. Please do ensure that those get sent, because we need those as part of our check. Okay, we'll get in a moment to the marking grids. I'm just going to, if I could find some buttons.
Just to pop in there and ask a question maybe that's come up, but which might be worth addressing to everybody, if we've got a moment.
Yeah,
John,
please
we've got
do.
a question. When is it best to offer the course, year 12 or 13? And I started to type, but it's not a binary choice, is it?
No,
and
it's not.
it
No.
often goes across the two. So the question is, when is it best to offer year 12 or 13? And how will the years studied affect the student's uni application?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we are very much in your hands here, because obviously as an awarding organisation, it's not our job to tell you how to do the teaching of the course, and we don't know your circumstances. I can say a few things. Well, first of all, I can say that if you do dig around on the Pearson website, you'll find that we have written schemes of work that give you all the options. An option of doing it in year 12, an option of doing it across both years, or I think there's an option for something like a 4-term model. There's even an option which we versioned out during the pandemic in lockdown learning phase. There's an option for doing an express EPQ within about 3 months. So there's no, as Rachel correctly says, there is no right answer. There are pros and cons. One of the advantages I myself have often used both years of the sixth form, partly because in year 13 the learners have a bit more maturity, a little bit more knowledge, a bit more confidence to bring into their work, perhaps. Having said that, that's probably where I started a long time ago, 20 years ago nearly now, and over the time I've steadily brought forward the deadlines that I use, partly because learners are often under enormous pressure in year 13, and partly because obviously getting much of the project work in place has advantages if they're looking to make university applications in, say, September, October in year 13. It doesn't mean you've got to finish the project, but if you're looking to support that with comments and predicted grades and so on, then it's good to have at least a decent chunk of the work in place by then. So sorry to be very vague about this, but we really do. It really is a question of adapting to the circumstances and just considering the obvious points. Avoiding pressure points in your academic calendar is one of those obvious points, and making sure that whatever you do, it aligns with UCAS entry processes or wherever the destination is for your learners.
Sorry, John, we've another one that I might just answer because I think it's easier spoken than typed in very longhand. It's a question about students doing displays instead of just an oral presentation at the end for review marks, which of course is a way of doing it. The question is, can this work with multiple students at once? But how would we do the observer record? Well, I think it's potential if you milled around and you perhaps spoke and interacted with the students at their presentation stand, had a conversation with them, and then it would be very much, I think, after that, collating your notes, thoughts, and creating the observer records from what you've seen and heard at the different stands.
Yeah, exactly. So I agree. Yes, it's a good question, and thanks for that, Rachel. That's a good explanation of what's available. I recommend. I don't know what it is on a new specification. It used to be on page 81, but on the revised specification, there's a page in the specification that gives a very helpful description of the different modes that can be used. It's wider than people think. I think the standard, every child has to stand up and talk for 10 minutes with a set of slides behind them. That's probably widely used, but that's not by any means the only mode that's available. All we do, you could even be using pre-recorded or material that's put onto a website so it can be viewed. But we do ask that there should be some interview component, some question and answer session where the learner is actually required to actually in live format actually address questions from their supervisor, possibly from others as well. And for obvious reasons, that's a very valuable way of getting some assessment evidence and doing a quality control check on the process. So as long as that's happening, there's no reason though why that couldn't be done with multiple learners in a synchronous exhibition. Okay. Have we got more questions at this point, or are we ready to?
We've just got one on AI, which could be good to touch on at the end, and I've put the links to all the wonderful resources that are up, because I think we can kind of almost say a big hurrah for EPQ, that I know Phil Holton in the team at Pearson has worked really hard on putting a big bank of AI resources together that are on the website.
Yes, please do have a look at that. It's a new feature on the website, the AI pathway. Obviously, in the background as well, just from the point of view of assessment confidence and standards, we have to keep in mind that there are now rules governing the use of AI within coursework qualifications. The document to look at there is the JCQ guidance to teachers. I think it's called something like AI use and academic integrity. And to cut a quite long document short, the key point to me is that this is in a sense not a new challenge, although it's a sort of new context. The reason I say that is because we've always required that learners document the sources that they've used. We've always required that it's clear when they use sources what's their own work and what's taken from another source in the form of, say, a quotation. And it's most important, of course, that when they hand work in that's presented as though they've done it, that it has been done by them and not the work hasn't been outsourced to AI, for example, for the AI to write on their behalf. Obviously, that wouldn't be allowed. So in a sense, the AI is no different from the principles for AI are no different in general from other sources. We'd always expect, for example, that sources are referenced and cited, and we would expect, as I say, if a student has interviewed somebody, they could quote from that interview and use it as a source, but obviously that has to be distinguished from their own writing. The only substantial extra feature that AI brings in, and this is an important point, is that, excuse me, learners should include, if they've prompted an AI program to produce material for them, they should include in a non-editable format a copy of the prompts that they gave to the AI and the responses that they received. The obvious place to do this would be in an appendix at the end of the project, although it could potentially be added to an activity log, but we do actually, it is required by JCQ that it should be done in a non-editable format. So in the end, it would need to be turned into something like a PDF rather than just a document that they could continue to edit. So have a look at the website, have a look at the JCQ guidance on that. And but essentially, it's the same principles that we always would follow with good academic integrity. Cite your sources, show clearly what's your own work and distinguish it from where you've made use of somebody else's, or in this case, something else's. Okay, are we, Rachel, how are we doing? Sorry, I haven't been tracking the threads closely. Are we?
No, we're
good.
I think that's covered everything.
Super. Okay, in that case, let me push some more buttons, and I think we're ready to move on to begin looking at some assessment points and the marking grids. So does this bring on screen? Let's have a look. Have we now got 301 appearing?
Yes.
Lovely.
Oh, no, we've got investigation field study.
Ah, okay. Okay, so let me see. Well, that's interesting. Let me try again. I just close that one for now. Let's try one more time. How's that?
Yes.
We're good?
Dissertation, yes.
Okay. All right. So we're going to have a little walkthrough of the marking grids. First thing to say is, as I said, there are four of them. So there are some differences, but there are substantial similarities. And so partly in the interest of time and partly because, as I say, we do think it's the same at some level underneath all of them, we're going to sort of bunch this together. So I'm going to mostly talk about dissertations and then highlight a few points at which the investigation unit differs. And then Rachel is going to do the same for performance and artifact. Okay, so AO1 is all about project management. And really the evidence for this will come from, I guess, three main areas. First of all, the project proposal form, that we expect the learners will all fill out. Secondly, the activity log that hopefully they keep as they go through the process. And then finally, there may also be some contribution from your own observations of them as learners, because as mentors, we would expect you to be working with them and meeting them on a reasonably regular basis so that you can be confident about the process that they're following. And I say this obviously thinking about our friend, the AI machines in the background. We want to be confident that the learner work is the learner's own work. And that's we can have greater confidence if we've been having those regular interactions. And they will provide some evidence for AO1, because as you see here, part of what we assess is the extent to which they have managed their time. Have they shown a reasonable or high level of organizational skill and ability and time management skills? That's something you might begin to notice as the course unfolds. In terms of the project proposal form, we'll look at some when we get to the exemplar work. But one of the key areas is the choice of question. And one of the key features in the dissertation is a really clear, well-focused question. This is not like the kind of project you might do when you were at primary school, when you did your project on the Vikings or the Egyptians. We expect there to be a question, and better still, a really quite precise question, something that's been sharpened up and made more clear as the project process unfolds. So one thing to be looking at is that, has there been a process of crystallization and refinement of the question? There's also a certain amount of information that goes into the proposal form that relates to the management of time, a plan of activities which needs to be reasonably detailed and appropriate. I mean, it's an 80-hour project, so we would expect to see those 80 hours planned out on the proposal form. There needs to be thought about the reasoning behind the choice of the title. Why does it matter to the learner? And why is it of wider significance as well? Often dissertations engage with socially challenging topics and questions that have an ethical or a social impact. So that should be the sort of thing that can be covered in the project proposal form. Clear objectives as well, objectives that relate to their aspirations, what they want to learn through the project, and also their development of their skills. What are they going to gain from doing that extended project? In terms of the log, you'll see that it needs to be clear and detailed, not cursory. If it's a cursory log, that's really mark band 1. But also it needs to have more than just activities. It's in some senses a poorly worded or poorly named document. I think it's not so much just about activity. It's also about thought and reflection and problem solving, all about those questions that a learner poses to themselves and then begins to explore as they go through the process. Have they met with problems? How have they solved them? What adjustments are they making as they go? It should be letting us in on the journey of ideas as well as the journey of activities. So that's AO1, the management of the project. AO2, use of resources. You'll see again, there's a few areas here that the criteria fall into. First of all, range of research, wide-ranging good bibliography. Typically for an 80-hour project, that's going to reach to being a page-long bibliography for many learners. That's not a hard and fast rule, because of course they might choose a smaller range and go in much greater depth. But a very standard dissertation at this level, if they've been working hard with maybe a source or two per week, then you might expect a corresponding length of bibliography. We want to see good referencing. We're teaching in the conventions of academic writing, so there should be bibliographies properly constructed and sources listed in an appropriate format. A question we always get asked is, do we require Harvard? And the answer is no. There's no required approach or a citations style, but it is required that there is a consistent system. Minimally, that would include details like the title, probably the author, a location of publication or a web link, probably a date and an access date as well. It's now trivially easy to get all of these done, and the learners, if they go to one of the automatic websites that builds bibliographies for them, can do it almost at the push of a button. So one of the things I would encourage in my teaching, my colleagues teaching this to learners, I'd be encouraging them to get some of that into their taught course element, because it's it's a really important skill. So there needs to be all of that side, but then of course it's all about what is done with the information. And in essence, we want to see learners going beyond simple collection of information. You'll see that in Mark Band 1, there are references to information being collated and with a sort of tenuous links between that and the project. But in the higher mark bands, we start to see words like source analysis, so really exploring in depth the meaning and significance of the information, and source synthesis, so drawing connections between sources, and source evaluation, really critically evaluating the reliability of sources. That's important for obvious reasons. We all know about the risk of misinformation and disinformation. So this is a place, again, to be teaching our learners about the importance of using academically robust, credible, objectively verifiable source information. So those are the core elements. There's probably also a more general point here as well about your sense as you read through the research that goes into a project, your sense of the depth of understanding. So sometimes, you know, there's a sort of haphazard approach, a little bit of information about a topic that's not connected to another, and we begin to think, well, does the learner really understand this? In the higher end, you start to get the sources well synthesized together, it's coherent, and there's a sense of complexity being addressed and thorough understanding. AO3 is all about, really, it's all about our argument. You'll see there's some criteria which relate to good, well-presented projects with good structure and good linguistic communication. But down here towards the middle and the bottom of the criteria, you'll see a lot of emphasis on argument and counter-argument. You know, a sustained, developed answer to the research question is what a dissertation should contain. And it needs to be evidence-based, it needs to be backed up from the research, and there needs to be consideration of both argument and counter-argument or alternative interpretations if, for example, they were looking at a more historical or linguistic approach. So really, this again is absolutely crucial then, of course, that learners pick, when they're choosing questions, they pick titles that do lead into that process of argument. You'll see that it's endlessly stated on our examiners' reports that the better titles are the ones that lead into this process of argumentation, the development and use of real critical thinking. Finally, AO4, two elements here. There are some criteria that relates to the oral presentation or the presentation more generally, if they've used a different modality. And there's some criteria that relates to the review of the project process. And what we ask is that you look at all of that holistically, and that your final mark for AO4 will relate to both. So you may, for example, watch the presentation, then read any written evaluative comments, and come to a holistic judgment, weighting those two elements equally. So it's important to say we don't absolutely mandate that a student writes their evaluation, but we do want to see quite detailed and precise and thoughtful commentary on the project process. And it's quite difficult if they only evaluate in the last couple of minutes of an oral presentation. It's quite difficult for them to do all of that. So in almost all cases, it's we normally would see both a written presentation, a written evaluation and a presentation of the work. The areas for evaluation are, I have an acronym for you, ALAL. So we expect them to consider the aims of the project, the limitations of the project, possible alterations, and the lessons that they've learned. So it's really thinking in detail and in some depth about the project process, rather than more comments about the content of the project. Okay. I will jump quickly because I'm very conscious that time is whistling by.
Can I just pick up a quick question that's come in?
Yeah, please do. Actually, I'm just trying to sort my screen share.
Evaluating reliability. We've got a question from Rachel. This is evaluating reliability. Is this in both the research review and discussion, or just the research review?
Good question. It could be in both. It's the key question is, the key point is that if you're using a source, then we would expect that there would be proper, evaluation of its reliability and proper consideration of that source wherever it's used. So if it's used in, I'll move the investigation out of the way because that's going to confuse us. If it's used in a dissertation, if it's used in a literature review, then obviously we would expect some evaluation of it there. But if a new source is introduced in a discussion, it's still, we need to evaluate it. We need to know if it's reliable or not. So the answer is both. Okay, let's move on then to consider the investigation unit. I won't dwell on this in depth because we do need to crack on, and I'm conscious we're giving you huge amounts of information. So you'll see similarities and a few differences with the dissertation. Similarities you'll see are that the research question is still a focus, but it could also include or maybe replaced by a hypothesis in the case of an investigation. And that's because, as I said, the emphasis is on data collection and testing of that data in relation to a hypothesis. In AO2, you'll see, again, some similarities in terms of referencing and construction of references and so on. But you will also see that then is a great emphasis on data collection, use of data collection and data collection techniques. So copious data needs to be collected, enough for you to do some really serious evaluation and analysis. In AO3, the emphasis is similar, well-constructed, good academic writing with good use of language and technical consistency and effective technical language. And again, not so much direct argument to counter-argument, but real thoughtful, perceptive analysis and interpretation of the topic area and the different possible answers that can be given to the question or hypothesis. And the key here is that you are effectively in AO3 for this investigation, building your arguments using data, looking for the trends, looking for the patterns, probably involving graphs, charts, statistics, numbers, that sort of thing. So it's much more about a numerical quantitative analysis than it would be in the case of a dissertation, which is almost always qualitative. AO4, I think I don't need to say much about, apart from an emphasis on the methodology possibly and the analysis of that, evaluation of that. There's really no significant difference with AO4 for the investigation compared to the dissertation. Okay, we're doing okay for time. We're a little bit behind where I'd hoped to be, but I think if you're happy, everybody, will just press on with a few more comments about the other assessment objectives. So Rachel, are you happy now to open up your screen and just share and talk us through 303, yes. 304?
Do terrific. That.
Thank you.
I'm just sharing now, so hopefully we should see the marking grid. We'll go to the marking grid for performance, I think, first of all. Can everybody see that? Is that on our screen now?
Yeah, that's good.
Splendid. I'll just move a few other things over. Okay, so for P303, lots very similar, much in common, so I won't spend too much time here. But you will see that we want a well-defined question that is, well, we want a commission brief and we want some specifics for that brief for the P304 performance. So although your learners may start with a research question, that will then become a very tight proposal for the performance. So for instance, they may have looked at a social issue. They may have looked, for instance, at the treatment of unaccompanied refugees or asylum seekers entering the country. But then they would develop that and think, how do I make a meaningful performance of that? So their brief could become something along the lines of work as a member of a group to create a contemporary dance piece inspired by the work of a practitioner and aimed at Key Stage 4 learners to share the stories of unaccompanied refugees and asylum seekers entering the country. So you see, this is how we start to develop from a question to a brief for our creative subjects. Moving on down, much the same as you would expect for the other units, but in terms of the planning, that you're very much planning for that performance. I think sometimes with creative subjects, learners can fall into the trap of planning for the write-up. It's very much plan for the project and the write-up will fall out of that. So if we move now to AO2, and you'll see that the types of different research that you're expected to do focuses very much on performance material, skills and techniques. So this is where we are a bit different in the creative subjects, and it really are expecting primary and secondary research. A lot of that research for P303 will be experiential. It will be the workshop, the rehearsal room. It will be trying out techniques and homing, dance, acting, or any other performance skills that are needed. It may well also take the form of a visit to see work that inspires the work that you're creating. And for 303 and 304, there is no explicit requirement for a literature review. Learners sometimes decide to do this. It's a brilliant way to build their skills for progression, but all that's required is a research record, so they can capture that within their supporting notebook, their activity, extended activity log, or however they like, but we do need it referenced. If we move on to AO3, which I love that we always describe as the big one, and we see that we're looking for a high level of involvement in and thorough understanding. So it's that complete connection and ownership to the work and the development journey. For 303 and 304, as John has said, we may get a retrospective account that looks quite formal and almost is a defence, quite an academic justification for the work that's done. It might also be a far more notebook style submission that looks like an actor's or a director's journal, where they've really captured that messiness that happens in the rehearsal room. And that's really the challenge you've got for the learners picking a creative project, to right from the outset decide how they're going to capture that amazing creativity that happens in the room as they develop for this unit their piece for the performance. So I think that's a top tip, really, that I know Helen, our principal, would say for this unit, is to make sure your learners have decided how they're going to capture. They might have clips, as John said. You might well use a PowerPoint and drop in clips and have some sort of annotated or even commentary on the work that's going on, but really get them to define how they're going to capture that very ephemeral, wonderful creative process that happens. So then as we go to AO4, I think very much the same. It's the same AO4 grid that we've seen, but with our creatives, what we'll see with this evaluation of assessing the project is that we come full circle, and that the strongest learners will very much be able to unpick that first commission brief and evaluate against all the different things they put into that brief. How well have they met their initial aims? How well have they achieved what they set out to do? So that's 3303. Oh, I'm giving you a little taste of what's to come. I need to go to the marking grid. So for our marking grids for 304, again, very focused. This time we're not thinking about a performance to an audience, or maybe more ephemeral outcome. We're thinking of an artifact, a physical, a design, or an artifact. And again, we have a commission brief that will be very focused. Rather than a target audience, we might talk about the user group. Rather than the genre, we might talk about the type of object, artifact we're going to create and the materials that we're going to use. There might be considerations of things like price point in there, but they really will have focused and honed to come up with a tight commission brief. So if we go back to our first example and the investigation into the treatment of asylum seekers and refugees, rather than the performance, an artifact might be something along the lines of create and build a prototype for the front and back end of a new app that can be used by people newly arriving in the country to find out what resources and support is available for them. You've probably got a million different artifacts you can think of, because it really is that unit that can be anything. So moving on to AO2, we see we've got materials and techniques we're investigating again, and straight away we're thinking primary research, as well as that secondary research. So that primary research might be the investigation, the learning of a new skill, technique, or process in order to complete that artifact. It might be a site visit. It might be a visit to an exhibition or some other event. It could be interviews with experts in the field. Sometimes we do see some primary research and, user groups, focus groups about looking at prototypes and ideas and designs. But as ever, it's absolutely making that link to the outcome. And I think where we can sometimes fall down, particularly in artifact unit, is if there's a disconnect and we have research on one hand and then an artifact sitting over there. The two need to absolutely come together and inform each other. For our big one, for our AO3, we've got the thorough development process, which again could be captured in design books or however best or in a more formal way. And I think this thorough understanding, when we come to the walkthroughs, we can maybe start to try to pinpoint what that looks like in practice. It is absolutely an understanding and an ability to use the vocational language of whatever area they're working in. And we'll want to see refinement, that we've gone through from initial designs through to prototypes, modeling, trying out ideas, throwing out ideas before we come to the final refined artifact. AO4, there we go, just the same as the others, and we go all the way back and we review that product or the artifact or design against the initial brief, as well as all stages of the process. So I can stop my share now and come back to John.
Super. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rachel. That's really helpful and clear. So thank you very much. I'm conscious of time's flying by, but I'm also conscious you've been listening patiently to us devolving enormous amounts of information. So I'm going to propose that we take 5 minutes now for a short break. And you could use that time if you haven't yet downloaded the resources. They're available. There's a button at the bottom of my screen, and I can see a button that says resources. And I think at the start, Katrina put a link in to that as well, so you can do the download. So if you haven't done the download, please do the download. And if you have done the download, you might want to just start having a flip through of what's in the resource folder. And then on my clock, it's 17:53. So I'm going to be strict and say we'll just take a 5-minute break. So whatever time zone you're in, let's roll forward by 5 minutes from now. So it'll be a 58 on your clock by the time we reconvene, and then we're going to whistle through some exemplars, have a chat about those, and any final questions. Yeah. So let's say 5 minutes from now, 17:54 on my clock. So 1 minute to the hour, we will reconvene. Okay, I think we'll crack on. We've got a remaining just over half an hour left, and we want to whistle through our exemplar. So it will be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, I'm afraid, because we would also like a bit of time at the end for any further comments, questions you may have, and also just to highlight some of the wonderful resources that are available to you to support you with your project. So without further ado, let me begin by dragging in an exemplar for the dissertation unit, if I can find the right tabs. Okay, has it worked? Have we got visibility of something that's a P301?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's just make that a little bit larger. Okay, I'm not gonna take you through everything in this. I just really the key thing is, as often is the case when we're assessing, is to start getting a sense of the fit between this and the assessment objectives and the marking grid, the language that's used in the marking grid. So this piece was internally marked on 48, and I think the moderation, I've got to bring the commentary in a minute, the moderation actually moved that up by 1 mark to 49. Apologies, by the way, some of this, there's been something a little bit odd's happened, I think, at the scanning stage with some of the text, but that doesn't matter for our purposes. So the question that this particular candidate was addressing is quite a big one. What is the role of capitalism in resolving climate change? So quite a bold question, but we've got a well-developed, in large part, fairly well-developed proposal form. Scope probably for a little bit more detail. There's not a huge amount there in section 2, for example, and section 3. We see as well that when we get into the activity log, that there's some evidence of planning meetings and discussions. We've got a good sense from this log of the journey that the learner has been on. So, this isn't just a learner who's just sort of telling us how many words they've written each week. Here we've got, for example, a comment about the title being broad and has therefore been resolved and refined to help narrow it, which is a good sign. So, a reasonable start there. And you'll see as well, once we get into the project, it's really very strong. And in AO2 and AO3, it's almost perfect. We've got good academic writing, well constructed, with an introduction, well laid out on the page, good, clear, solid style, objective and academically credible. Really extensive use of sources, which are well analysed and linked together in the research review. Plenty of data as well, as you would expect on a topic like this. Use of charts and graphs as well. And obviously I'm only skimming through this, but we already started to get a sense of good quality understanding of the material here. A strong piece of work. All right, so let's jump through as well and look at the discussion section. This is where typically the learners will engage in argument, putting their arguments, considering their counter arguments. And one of the features of high-end work is that there really is sustained engagement with counter argument. This is not just somebody who knows what they think, it's someone who can actually defend what they're saying against possible objections. So we'll see the word however is used reasonably frequently as we get into the discussion. And it's also all very, very source-based. Plenty of use of sources, plenty of use of data. So we can start to see some howevers appearing here. We're considering arguments, but we're also considering counter arguments. There we go again, another paragraph starting off with another counter argument. And this page is, again, we're seeing argument and counter argument. Just count the number of times you see the word however, and you'll see this is someone who's really arguing rigorously. So good, solid, detailed, evidence-based, considering argument, counter-argument, strongly scholarly in its tone. There's really very much little else we could ask for in the dissertation. I'll jump through because we have time, but it is, as you say as well, extensive and detailed in its treatment. Fully developed conclusion, evaluation, a little bit succinct perhaps, but pretty thoughtful, pretty perceptive, and honest as well. I struggled with time management. I started the project a little late. This is not someone who's trying to gloss over the difficulties that they had. Well-constructed bibliography, and some evidence as well from the oral presentation at the end. So how did that stack up against our marking grid? Very well. It scored not top of mark band 3 universally. A01 could have been further developed. As I mentioned, the log was a little bit brief. So the proposal form was a little bit brief in detail, and probably a little bit more could have been done to refine the title, even though there was some refinement. So this sat comfortably at the lower end of mark band 3, 7 out of 9. Almost perfect for AO2, excellent use of sources, could have perhaps engaged a little bit more in evaluation and analysis of source reliability. And again, almost perfect in AO3, possibly being picky here. Why wasn't it top marks? Possibly the breadth of the title, I don't know. It's hard to say really. This was a very strong piece of work. And finally AO4, the oral presentation and the written evaluation combined to support an AO4 mark in the middle of mark band 3 as well. So here we have an exemplar of strong performance in P301. Let me then jump rapidly, as the clock is ticking, to P302. I hope this has appeared on screen. Have we got a 302 in front of us now? Okay, so 302, we're here in the realm, as I've said before, of data collection and analysis, and this project scored lower than the 301 that we've just looked at, and you can see without going into detail just why that was the case. Just if you look at the level of response and the depth of development of the work. I'm going to jump through these marking sheets because they're not, we don't need those at this point. How temperature affects plant growth and development. So broad title, possibility though for some investigation and some data collection, but it's a broad title. Quite a lot there in terms of reasons for the project and the planning. The activity log, it's fair to say, in this project is less developed. There are some observations and reflections and steps taken, but if you look at it, we jump through pretty much one entry per month and then 2 or 3 entries for the, I think possibly some work experience or lab work was done over the course of, where are we, all in the same month there?
Sorry, John, we're still on the
sorry.
one exemplar. We've not
okay, it hasn't stopped over. Let me just stop it. Sorry about that. Let's try again. Okay, try that one. Okay, has that appeared? Oh no, that's given us, have we got, sorry?
That's the commentary.
Okay, we've got the commentary right. Okay, it's because I'm on the other screen. Let me just pull over just a moment. Sorry about this. I'll just pull the dissertation, the project across. 302 exemplar. Okay, let's try that one then. Okay, so we should have, can we see an oral presentation? And
yes,
yeah,
scrolling backwards from the oral presentation.
Yeah, so as super.
Now. Yes.
Apologies. Let's just recap then. So as I said, quite well developed proposal, log, frankly, less well developed, and so some oral presentation evidence. Let's just jump through that. You'll see that it's quite well laid out. We have a literature review, largely presenting information about the topic. there's a little bit of background into the different bits of relevant biology. There's a bit of methodology. I think this was based on some lab work, probably supervised lab work that the candidate did. Some photographs of the work that went on in the laboratory. Consideration of safety, a bit about measurement and then image analysis. And then we have some data with some analysis, 2 or 3 charts, 3 or 4 charts, some data analysis, quite technical, we're getting sort of p-values considered and things, and then a reasonable conclusion based on the data, and a little bit of calculation, and then the bibliography. So this scored, I'll try again and see if I can get this screen to show. This scored largely in mark band 2 rather than mark band 3. So, you know, we're looking at reasonable development rather than really good development in the different areas. Have we got the marks of the commentary on screen now, Rachel?
Yes, all
Yeah.
showing perfectly.
Okay. So it was midway through mark band 2 for AO1. Some definition, a clear attempt to refine the question, but it's still quite a broad question. Log, as they've noted in the commentary here, not thoroughly developed and doesn't cover a long period, but there was some evidence of management of the process. It was noted as well, I think, by the internal assessor that there was some support provided. Top of mark band 2 for AO2, because there's quite a good range of sources, mention about data collection techniques, some use of referencing, and some links between the information and the question. The AO3 was probably the strongest part. There was top of mark band 2 there. Well, actually, to be fair, AO2 is top of mark band 2 as well. So AO2, AO3, top of mark band 2. We're looking at well-structured investigation, reasonably well-structured, and some elements of generally good understanding, some mathematical calculations, and a reasonable presentation of the work. Scope, I think it's fair to say by implication that for the analysis to have gone further. I mean, this was essentially, I think, as I said, 3 or 4 graphs with a commentary on those, but there was scope for that element to have gone further. And finally, AO4, again, 6 out of 9. So yeah, good mark band 2 work, supporting what I think the teacher assessor had said here, some evidence of evaluation, and the oral presentation fitted into top of mark band 2. So a nice project with some features that show good development, but scope in that one for further work. Okay, it's on my clock 6:12. We've got 18 minutes to go. Rachel, are you ready to tee up a couple of exemplars and give us an overview?
Yes, I think I am. I'm just trying to get into mine, and we should have come up. Has that worked?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, I just think I need to move some things over. Have we got a bar across the screen, or are we getting an uninterrupted view of the work?
No, we can see it. It's all clear.
That's marvellous. Okay, so we've got 303. This is a musical piece. It's a composition piece. We won't play the music over my words, so you can hear my dulcet tones and my lovely voice, but it is worth a listen. And this project is Lockdown Suite, responding to initial research question: can music be used to evoke shared collective and individual experiences related to lockdown? So we see a research question there, a challenge that has that synthesis of ideas and complexity of argument, and this achieved full marks, which were held by the moderation. So this is an example of a very strong piece of work. As we go through, you'll see project proposal, succinct, clear, full marks, because we can reward material and evidence that's elsewhere. The objectives are very clear, but we've not yet quite got that refined brief, but that is in the body of the work, because as we move down, we start to see how the learner, and I'll probably struggle to pick it out very quickly through it, but they actually refine within these materials to a brief to create 5 movements for a brass ensemble. And they consider the audience and they work towards a recording and the production of the score. As we look through the activity log, I think you can see the quality, and the next steps, the reflection, are always there. This is a learner that's highly engaged, completely motivated, and all the time almost evaluating, moving forward, feeding forward. What can I do? We start to see as well that there is this ongoing underpinning research. We see they're trying to find new ideas to deal with the challenges. If something they feel is too generic, they'll go and look for inspiration to find a new way to do it. And it's that consistent moving forward, developing and refining the work. As you can see, very comprehensive activity log. As we move down, we've got, this is formal presentation. It's one way to full marks. You can also get to full marks with a far more informal capturing of your process. But we see through here the research into practitioners, and those practitioners and the other composers really feed into the quality of the work and the understanding of the learner. The research is specific, it's valuable, and it's all the time applied to the outcome. The literature review, this is somebody, we always say, building skills for progression. I absolutely can see that it's happening there. And all the time, here we see this synthesis to create something of their own that really describes how and why they're going to use the research. All the times they're supporting their creative intentions and thinking about the audience as well. And we said, I think, what does thorough understanding look like? And I think you can see by the use of consistent vocabulary and musical terms that this is a learner that undoubtedly at level 3 has an absolutely thorough understanding of composition. Move on through, you can see absolutely able to describe what they've done and how they've refined it. And as we move through, we'll scroll very quickly and you'll see the score, professionally produced, and almost this is a learner who in terms of the composition is working beyond level 3 at points. And that's what we expect to see right up at that very top of the band. It's starting to look more like undergraduate work. We have a conclusion that really interrogates the success against the aims they initially set out to do. And there we see the lockdown suite for the 5 brass instruments, which I do say, have a little listen when you get a chance. So we'll now skip over to 304. 304, this achieved a more mid-range mark, more on a par with the investigation that we showed you. This achieved a mark of 37 overall, so a good solid, mainly on that cusp of band 2 and top of band 2, bottom of band 3. So straight away we see a 7. There's not the refinement and the clarity of ideas in the project proposal form. We also see as we go through this that there is some development and refining of ideas. They start off talking about an app and then the app never happens. It just becomes a birdhouse. But nevertheless, we can credit what we see, but it's a fairly clear rationale as opposed to the very clear rationale that we saw for 304. They have considered the resources they're going to use, and it's completely appropriate P304 submission. When we go to the exemplar work, we see here a lovely example of a design portfolio. Now, what I don't want anybody to do is think, it's a design portfolio, it got a 37, the formal written write-up got a 5th, got full marks. There were other submissions from the centre in this house style that did achieve those very high marks. It is possible to do that with this style of presentation. So here we see the contents very clearly laid out. We see a different way of recording your bibliography and the sources, but justifies how and why they were used. And we still can credit this as structured supporting materials. We've really got it clearly sectioned and titled. It's very easy to navigate. Project record, the strength of this project record is, again, we see, and why this hits the Mark Band 3 criteria, that always evaluating and commenting on how we're managing the project. Planning as well, a wealth of additional planning evidence that we can credit. There's a Gantt chart, and it's actually used, and there's commentary on how affected it's been. Then we see research, we start to see it into a target market, right back to the beginning when we talked about those specifics. We've got a design brief, might not have been written in huge clarity on the project proposal, but we start to get it more clearly articulated as we go through. And again, more planning, there's a research plan. So we go through and we see product analysis for P304, different type of research, very valid. But this is a Band 2 use resources. As we can see, it's maybe more linear. There's not that synthesis. It's considering one thing at a time and not so much reasoning and not that thorough understanding of the complexities that perhaps we want higher in the range. There's functional research. There is wide-ranging research, and it is completely appropriate for design technology project, which is why we can start to hit some of those top band descriptors. And there is some consideration of materials, although this could perhaps be developed in this case. And so we start off with initial sketches. We can see the quality of the sketches, and this achieves a high Band 2 mark. There is annotation, and this could be perhaps developed and perhaps use more of the technical language and the technical precision that we saw in the first project to achieve a higher band. But all the time, the original ideas are reviewed against the specification. There is a clear journey. And what's lovely about this project is we go from design to cardboard models, through to CAD models, and through to making the actual build. All clearly set out. Go through there, you can see the final product, and then we get through to our final review with a screenshot of the presentation. And I think it's safe to say a briefer Band 2 evaluation. There isn't that high level of perceptive insight that we see at the top of the range. The centre have been really fair and rigorous in assessing it. We do see an evaluation against the specification. I talked, didn't I, about going full circle, and this is a centre and a candidate that's managed to do that, and some personal review as well. So I think hopefully when you've more time to go away and consider, you'll be able to see how that sits where it does, as opposed to some of the stronger work we've seen in the other subjects. So now I need to come off my screen share. I can find a way to do that. I seem to be rather stuck. No, I can come off it. There we go. And back to you, John.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was really illuminating and lovely to see through what you shared there, the variety of outcome types across the different units, showing us the breadth of what's possible with the EPQ. So we've worked our way through some exemplars. We've had a good chat about marking. There are some slides at the end of the slide deck, but I don't feel hugely that we will miss out if I don't show them to you now, because essentially they offer links to resources, many of which we've already mentioned, and I commend them to you for your future study and for use. So that gives us about five or 6 minutes. So I hope you may have some final thoughts or questions to pop in for us based on what you've seen, any comments you want to make by way of reaction to the exemplars or questions that they have raised. So I'll give you a moment to, so I can see we've got a question about a good free Gantt chart resource. I don't off the top of my head know of one, but whenever I'm looking for things like that, I just tend to, if you type into your search engine, what would be a good free or maybe we could ask the AI to help find it for us now. They seem to, some of them seem to be quite good at that, as they sort of digest our questions in natural language. But yes, I'm sure there are versions out there for this kind of thing, or set that as an exercise for the student themselves, show a little bit of a research skill by identifying some of those and choosing the best. Okay, have we got any more questions? I can see, Rachel, you've done a great job. I'm just scrolling through the thread now. I think we've tackled everything that's there. Was a question there about, there may have been one question about, sorry, we've just got someone, I don't think that's me in the background, there's some background noise. I'll just mute there if that's okay. Please keep the comments coming in on chat. There was a question about how can the proposal form show refinement if it has to be signed off. Well, that's a great question. The answer is, I don't know if maybe you did answer that. You've already answered it, haven't you, Rachel? That you can continue to update a log. It's a work in progress document, even if it's, the signing off is very much to say it's been approved in the sense that it's not unethical, or that it's not dangerous, or that it's not drawing too much on work that a learner has already done. You know, it doesn't have overlap issues with other qualifications. Those are the purposes for which we expect sign off. They don't at all imply that the question can't yet be further refined.
Got a couple more coming in. Again, we've got another question about detailed project proposals that's sort of covered in your last response. It's somebody taking over, as we all quite often do in our professional lives, don't we? Maybe pick up a cohort halfway through. Is there a way for students to still show high level managing? Well, we've got the activity log, and we've got just that overall impression and that holistic view of the whole portfolio that absolutely is a consideration. But I would flag up, if they're still working on the project, that activity log is absolutely a place to capture any refined objectives, any refined research ideas, absolutely anything can all go in there and be credited by the centre.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, to what Rachel said, I should have said at the start, when I was saying that the evidence usually comes mainly through the log and the proposal form, you can still see AO1 evidence in a project outcome. As I think Rachel's made this point, that the introduction, for example, may give a really good description of the rationale for the project or the objectives for the project. And so that's AO1 evidence right there. It doesn't have to all be on the proposal form. But as we've said, it's a work in progress document. And if during the course of working on their project, they've refined their understanding of it, they've picked new areas for research, or they've sharpened up the question, it's absolutely fine for them to go back and edit the proposal form so that the final proposal form should really correspond to the final form of the project, if that makes sense. And of course, they can also document in their activity log that they're making those changes. Yeah, just briefly now, because we are about to run down the clock. There's a question there about if they're doing recorded presentations rather than live. The answer is yes for the presentation component, but there should be some interaction with an interviewer for the Q&A part, so that we would expect them to actually answer questions rather than just give a recorded presentation. But it may well be appropriate for them to have pre-recorded the actual presentation, and then you sit down with the learner and talk them through what they've shown and ask the questions about the process and so on.
Changes on project proposal, we've got, we see it done in different ways. People can use a different colour, perhaps as you go to a different draft. If it's a bigger redraft, a second draft can be handed in. So there are different ways to do it depending on the amount of new information that needs to be added. Yeah,
I think it's helpful to from the point of view of moderation, it's helpful if the final is clear what the final proposal should be, because it does look a bit odd if the proposal sort of relates to a version of the project that's now been discarded, if that makes sense. So there's no problem at all if an overwritten proposal form is submitted, as long as it's clear what journey the learner's been on, and that could be recorded through the activity log. Okay. I think we probably do need to call time there, because otherwise unless anyone can ask a question that can be answered within seconds, I suspect we've reached the limit for today. So can I say thank you very much to Katrina, who's been running the session for us. Thank you very much to Rachel for her comments, and to all of you for your contributions and your questions. And I do hope you have a very enjoyable experience as you continue your project journey along with your learners. So thank you all, and do have a browse the slides for some of the further links that are available. As I say, I won't bring them up now, but they're all there for you to peruse at your leisure. Thank you, everybody.